I'm Karen Borda. Thanks for joining us today on Plugged Into DFW. According to a 2017 survey by Care.com, 58% of American adults don't have a will or trust, and that could lead to some serious problems down the road. Now, this morning we discuss Estate Planning 101 and how to protect your family when the inevitable happens. Joining me this morning is President and CEO of Dewitt & Dunn Financial Services. Please welcome to the program, Cathy Dewitt Dunn. Good morning.
Good morning.
So when we say the inevitable, I mean, it is inevitable. All of us are going to die, right? At some point, death and taxes. It's going to happen.
Exactly.
Exactly. So let's talk about that. This isn't easy to discuss death. I mean, I know even dealing with my elderly parents, it's just not something that it's easy to approach. How do we get started with that conversation?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. It's such a difficult subject, and I think that's one of the reasons why we're going to talk about it today, because no one wants to talk about it, right?
Right.
And, as in my practice, I see a lot of my clients that come in, their kids are afraid to ask them about their money. They think it's none of their business. And what I say to them is, oh, that is absolutely not the case. And it's a financial discussion that we really need to have.
So what should the first question be when we are discussing this? Do you have a will? Is that it? Or is there something else?
Yeah, I mean, I think basically is, what is your plan? What is your plan with your money? Do you have a will? Do you have an estate plan? Where are we headed in this conversation? And how have you designated all of that money to be distributed after you've passed? I mean, that's the biggest thing, is you don't want that to be left up to a court or a judge to decide that for you.
Right, especially when there are multiple siblings, or it can get ugly. We've seen it in the news, right?
Right, and I mean, one of the biggest challenges is that 50% of Americans do not have a will. And that's just really baffling to me, because you've worked your entire lifetime to accumulate all these assets and to have all of these things with your family. The biggest thing you now need to do is to make sure that you have allocated and you have decided, do I need a will? Do I need a living will? Do I need a trust or an estate plan? And where do I head with, where do I go with all of this money?
Right, and really the answer is we do need wills, right? All of us do. We were just discussing that. So if you don't have one, you do need a will. But why do you think people put it off making that will?
Well, because then all of a sudden you're faced with having to be the reality of your demise later down the road. Yeah, I know, and it's just really a scary thing. So people think, out of sight, out of mind, that's not going to happen to me, and I'm going to deal with it later. I'll make that decision later. Well, actually, what you've just done is made the decision not to deal with it. So what you want to do is take a look at, and a will, you need to name an executive, and that's the person who's going to handle your provisions at your death. Then you want to name your beneficiaries, and those are the people that are going to inherit your assets later down the road. It could be your family members, a friend, a church, and then you want to designate how much money that individual or that institution is going to receive. And the biggest thing that I see that people miss is the minor children. You definitely need to make sure that you've named a custodian for them individually and a separate custodian when it comes to money if they're going to be inheriting any type of asset whatsoever, because then that will remove the conflict of interest. Because if you have someone that's managing a child that has access to all of this money now, well, maybe they're not going to have the children's best interests at heart. So I always recommend having two different custodians that are named in a situation of assets with kids.
So what happens if you die, if someone dies and there is no will?
Oh my gosh, well, chaos is going to erupt, right?
Yeah.
Every family member is going to come out of the woodwork, and then what's going to happen is it's going to end up in probate, and a judge and a court of law, depending upon what state you're in, is going to make up the decision of where your assets are going to go. And that's absolutely probably what you didn't want to have happen, right? You probably in the back of your mind knew, oh, if something happened to me, I would give my assets to this person or that person. And just by having it written down and having a plan in place, that's going to eliminate also all the fees that are associated with the judge being involved in that.
And I think a lot of people go into this thinking, oh, it's going to be so expensive for me to put a will together. But still, even if you don't do it, you're going to end up paying. And like you said, things may not happen the way you would have wanted them to happen.
Exactly. And then the other thing is, too, is that it becomes very expensive because you didn't really plan ahead. And one of the reasons why we want to have wills in place is because we love the people that are around us, and we want to make sure that they're taken care of. And by having all of this handled ahead of time, that's going to prevent siblings and arguments and things of that nature.
Right. So why is the will so important in estate planning?
Well, because you can designate exactly where everything is going to go.
Okay. And now, how does the estate plan differ from the will?
Well, it really comes down to how much money you have. So an estate plan really, so a will, you can name assets to go immediately to that individual. An estate plan also can allow you to say, I don't want this person to have 100% access of my asset right now, and you can designate over a period of years of how that money is going to be paid out to them. An example would be with a child, maybe they'd get a little bit of money this year and then a little bit more next year, help them with college, help them with, you know, a future marriage or buying a home later down the road.
So they don't blow it all.
Right. So
yeah.
I really, and it comes down to how much money is in the estate, right? That's the biggest thing too you have to take a look at is that with the estate and the privacy. So if you have an estate plan, you can minimize your privacy, what's going to be out there, you know, on the internet, and we know what happens then. And then also the expenses that are associated with that. And it's a concrete plan by having an executor that has been named.
So we've established everybody needs a will, but not everybody needs an estate plan. Is that right?
That is true, because I mean, if you have a car, if you have furniture, you want to give that away, a will be a simple instrument for that to happen. But an estate plan really comes down to making sure that, you know, longevity, making sure that your money's going to, you know, go on to your heirs over a period of years, and they don't have 100% access typically to it. And you can designate that while you're alive versus having a court doing that for you.
We've got so much more to talk about. It is time for our first break, but coming up, wills aren't just for the wealthy. Next, we're going to break down how to make one and what to include. And we'd like to hear from you. If you've got a community issue or concern, send us an email. Our address is pluggedintodfw@cbs.com, and we'll do our best to address your items every week. Welcome back. I'm joined this morning by Cathy Dewitt Dunn, President and CEO of Dewitt Dunn Financial Services. We have been talking about the importance of estate planning this morning. We've discussed this. No one wants to think about our own mortality and what happens when we die. But if you do have assets or if you have children, you really need to create a will, right?
Absolutely, and I think the biggest thing for me is that people, when they have a will, and you definitely need to make sure you have one in place if you have children, and perhaps an estate planning. You know, one of the things that we talked about while we were on break is that a lot of people do have an estate plan, and maybe they created it when they first had their children, and they're in school, and they're working, they got busy, but in the back of their mind, they know that they have it there, but we need to update it. And that's one of the biggest challenges I see with a lot of people is the fact that they're not updating it. So we have births, we have deaths, we have marriages, we have divorce, we have stepchildren. There's a lot of things that come into play, but you really need to sit down and update it every 2 years, or if something comes up in between.
Okay.
And it has to be state specific. So you have to make sure that, you know, if you created a will or an estate plan in another state and now you're in Texas, we need to update that. So there's a lot of things that come in that are in play that, you know, that we need to look at.
Yeah, you're speaking directly to me because that's, you know, that I absolutely, we were only about 17 years behind the curve. We've got to get on it. So what is the first step in writing a will?
You know, first of all, is gathering all of the assets. You know, where are they? Your bank accounts, your brokerage accounts, your property, your jewelry, your assets. Because that's the biggest thing, is a lot of people don't even realize what they've accumulated throughout their lifetime, right? And once you put a pen to paper, there's a lot of things that you need to take a look at. So you could have a will and you could designate that, but then you need to look at making sure that you've designated an executor of your will that's going to, you know, that's in good standing, that's going to make sure that your wishes have been fulfilled. Okay,
so that executor is someone who is looking out for your best interests.
Absolutely.
Right? And you can choose anybody, right? It doesn't have to be,
It doesn't have to be, you know, it can be a friend, it can be a third party, it can be a banker, it could be a lawyer. You get to pick that person.
All right, so if you do have young children, what issues should you consider when you're putting your will together?
Oh, this is a really big one. So I think one of the challenges, you know, for young families is this fact that if you have an executor that's been named to take care of your children, and they also have access to all the money that this child's inherited, that might be a conflict of interest. So my big thing for people is that you definitely want to have probably, you know, 2 people designated to take care of your child, being one being the caregiver, and 2 being the person that's going to oversee those assets. So then you've removed the conflict of interest for them.
Right, because that would be tough, I would imagine.
I know, and that is really one of the things that I see the most, you know, and with my clients is that they've never really considered that. Well, I have one person, they're going to look at their money, they're going to take care of them, and that might not be the best way to go.
Okay. Well, what about our pets? Should they be included in the will?
Well, their property, right?
Yeah, I guess, yeah.
I mean, you know, and that's one of the things that I think people need to understand. Everything that we have is a property, whether it's a couch, a car, but pets. So I don't know if you remember way back when Leona Hemsley.
Oh, right.
Yes,
Cat?
right?
Yeah.
It was a dog.
Oh,
She
was that a dog?
$12 million to her dog. So she had a pet trust. And so she designated who the executor was going to be, who was going to take care of the pet, and made sure their living expenses. You can set that up too. Or you could have a simple will if you don't have $12 million, right?
Right.
And just you could designate who's going to receive the pet and what you would like to have, you know, done with the pet later down the road. But that is something that we need to definitely consider.
So really, when you're putting this together, I mean, sometimes just kind of getting all the banking stuff figured out is overwhelming. But when you're talking about, you know, who gets the big screen TV, I mean, just stuff. It's everything. You really need to make sure that if you want something to go someplace, you really need to make sure it's spelled out.
It's designated. And I think the other thing is, too, is if there's a lot of siblings or other family members, it's really clearly defined who's going to get what. And I think one of the biggest things that I always find that's the aha moment is the fact that if you can actually list who would not receive anything in your estate. That's something that you can do. You can leave somebody out. And then the second thing is that you could say, well, to the executor of the estate, well, my children or people are arguing and we can't come to terms over these certain items. You have the authority to sell them so we can remove the conflict. And that is really key sometimes inside of a will, is giving that power to an executor to be able to liquidate the assets if the kids have decided that they can't agree on them.
Wow. Oh, what about the family heirlooms and things like that? That's kind of a challenge, right? So if you take a look at, oh, mom told me that I could have that, or dad said I could have his gun collection. So I think if you spell that out and you've written it out in your will, then it's not going to be contested. And if it is, if you have that clause, then you can just have the executor sell everything. And all of a sudden you find that the children all of a sudden will really start to get along because they don't want that item to go away. Right. The King Solomon, right?
Right. And then I have a checklist on my website at DeWitt & Dunn for people that really want to see maybe some things that they need to be aware of, and they can download it and just kind of take a look and, you know, start planning now, because if you plan now, maybe you won't need it later down the road until you're much older.
So where do you keep your will and all of that stuff when you get it made up?
You know, some people like to store it in a safety box or a waterproof box at their home. But the other thing for me would be is maybe you want to keep it at the bank in a safety deposit box, but make sure if you've done that, that you have somebody has access to it other than yourself, right? Yeah. Because that's the big thing for people is that you've done all the difficult work. You have to make sure that everybody knows where these items are, where they can find your will or your estate plan. So later down the road, you know, they know where it's at. And if you don't feel comfortable with it being in a, you know, in a box somewhere, make sure maybe your estate attorney has, or your financial advisor has a copy of it in the original signatures, because they're going to be able to help you later down the road.
Right. Okay. Again, putting it in a third party's hands. Okay.
Right. Exactly.
It is time for another break. Coming up, we're going to break down the different parts of an estate plan, such things as financial power of attorney and living will. Cathy explains what it all means. Please stay with us. Creating a will is just the first step in estate planning. Cathy Dewitt Dunn, President and CEO of Dewitt & Dunn Financial Services, is here to share other important aspects to include in our plans. Some of these things we don't think about, but beyond a will, you say that an estate plan should also include these four things: financial power of attorney, health care power of attorney, living will, and trusts. So let's talk about what each of these means. So what is financial power of attorney?
Well, it's interesting. This is a document that gives the person the power to act on your behalf on your finances. And you can limit that power as well. It depends upon how much power you want them to have. But, you know, it helps you with, you know, bank accounts, being able to sell stocks and bonds if you become incapacitated, having access to be able to sell real estate, finding out everything on your checking accounts. I think it's really important. I think we talked about our aging parents. And having a financial power of attorney allows you basically to be them, to make sure that all of their finances are handled, I mean, including credit cards, because all of a sudden you come to a point where a parent is not able to contact the credit card companies. And as we both know, that's a very difficult thing, because now you've got to go find out, all the pieces to the puzzle if they had, people have not put them together.
And if you don't have that power of attorney, they won't always deal with you.
Well, they probably won't, because of privacy laws now, right? Maybe 10, 20 years ago, we would have been able to talk to them, but now everything is online, everything's, digital, and they really have to have this document. So a financial power of attorney is very important, because if you're incapacitated and you need to go into a nursing home, or if you're in a hospital, who's going to pay that bill? Well, obviously, it's not going to be you writing the check. So having that power of attorney really enables that person to become you. The biggest thing I can say on this particular aspect is make sure you have a person who's trustworthy and dependable, because they're going to act on your behalf on all of your finances.
Right. So how old should we be before we start thinking about needing to get a financial power of attorney? Is someone our age, is this too young to start thinking about it? Or?
I don't think so. I mean, if you take a look, like my father's in a nursing home here in the DFW area, in a rehab center, there are people in that facility that are in their 30s and their 40s that had an event that was unexpected. So I think I always go by that adage, if you have it, you probably won't need it. So regardless of your age, if you have money and assets, you definitely want to take a look at having that financial power of attorney.
Okay, now let's move on to the next one, the health care power of attorney. What is that?
Well, that is going to give the person that you've given that power to the ability to act for you medically. That allows them to look at your medical records. That's going to allow them to maybe, allow you to go to a different facility, to a hospital, work with the doctors, make medical decisions, and that includes, do I want to be on life support? Do I not want to be on life support? So it really allows them the full-blown range medically of what they're acting on, your behalf. But that's a conversation that you've had ahead of time with this person, right? And what they would expect, because they're acting, for you.
So can one person cover both of those roles, or is that advisable?
No, both persons can. I mean, for both, one person can handle both areas. So, and I mean, just an example would be, I have that on my father, and it makes it easy, because then I know medically how much money I'm having to spend, and then I know where I'm going to be able to get that money. So it's kind of nice to have it hand in hand on that.
So what is a living will?
You know what, people get a living will kind of confused with a will, right? Right. Unless you do this every single day, you wouldn't know the difference. But a living will is really what happens to you while you're alive. So what medical procedures do you want to have done while you're alive, even if you're incapacitated? Do you want to be on life support? Do you want to be taken off life support? What about DNR, do not resuscitate? And also, there's so many different medical procedures now that they use to keep people living longer, that you can also say that I'm not interested in those. So that is giving somebody the power to handle things for you while you're alive and medically making decisions. And
what about a trust? What is that, and why can it be beneficial?
Well, a trust is really awesome for someone that has assets, and what that means is that money is just being held basically in escrow until your demise, and that money can then be given to your grandchildren or your children, especially if they're underage. So it just kind of allows a governor to be placed on that money, and to have somebody overseeing it, being an executor once again, to make sure that they don't have access to 100% of the money. And also a charitable trust. A lot of my clients that put money in a charitable trust, that is just sitting there until your demise. It's accumulating, and you're giving money off to charities, and then at the end, the money is distributed. So a trust can be a very powerful tool and part of an estate plan.
Oh, okay. It's all part of it. I get it now. All right, so we've got one more break coming up. When is the right time to seek professional help? It may be sooner than you think. I'm going to tell you next. Wills, estates, and a power of attorney can be very overwhelming. A professional can help you sort it all out and create a legal estate plan to cover you and your family. Cathy Dewitt Dunn, President and CEO of Dewitt & Dunn Financial Services, joins us to talk about how to find help. So when is the right time to talk to a financial professional?
Well, as soon as you think that you need either a will or an estate plan, right? And one of the biggest challenges is right now we have the internet and Google, and everybody's out there trying to save money, and they're going out and Googling all these different forms. That's a really scary proposition, because wills trusts and estate plans are state specific.
And so if you and I were talking off camera a minute ago, so if you're pulling something up and you think, oh, this is great, but if you don't look at the very fine print and it says, oh, South Carolina, it's void?
Absolutely, and the other challenge is I'm married to a litigator, and I think a lot of people want to, do the self-help and, do all the forms together. But the challenge is that if you miss one signature, or if you invert a signature, if you don't initial a page, everything is null and void, and now all of a sudden, all your money's going to go, to an estate that's going to have to be overseen by a probate judge, and that's exactly the whole reason why, you went to Google, right? Yeah. And I think one of the challenges, if it's on the internet, it has to be true. Well, no, that could even actually be an old document. So if you have assets, it's really worth, hiring a professional to make sure that everything is set in stone.
So who do we turn to? Where do we start? How do we find this wonderful person? And what questions should we be asking?
One of the big things is that in Texas, we do not have estate tax. So that's a really great place. I mean, everything's big in Texas except estate tax, right? So I think what you want to do is you want to you can research attorneys all day long on the internet. Find somebody, now that we have, I hate to say it, but we have Yelp, we have all these tools at our hands, but what you want to do is pick up the phone, call them, or shoot them an email if you found someone that you think that you could work with, and ask them, how much do you charge? Am I going to be dealing with you? Is it a set fee? Who else is going to be looking at my stuff at your firm? How am I going to be billed? And make sure that you have a contract in writing, so you know what it charges are, what the charges are that you could expect, because nobody wants a surprise when it comes to this.
So how much does it usually cost to create a simple estate plan?
Typically anywhere from $300 to $1,200. It really just depends upon how many different documents that you need. But sometimes, when it comes to an estate plan, that could be upwards of $5,000. But, the thing is that if you really love the people that you're trying to take care of later down the road, it's a really great tool for them to avoid a lot of conflict in the family, because perhaps mom and dad aren't going to be there to tell the children to calm down anymore, right? So it's just going to be amongst the siblings. But, but just do your homework, make sure that you know what you're getting into, and, maybe also consult with your financial advisor. And they can help you as well.
Thank you so much, Cathy. Really appreciate the great advice. That is our time for now, but we want you to stay plugged into DFW. We'll see you next week. Until then, I'm Karen Borda. Have a great weekend.